So the question is this: do you often find that the low end in your mixes tends to be a mess? Well, in this straightforward tutorial, I'm going to share with you 3 simple mixing techniques that could really help out the low end in your productions. Let's discuss. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump right in and share these 3 mixing techniques with you. In my opinion, they are techniques that I don't see enough people talking about, and they can have a massive, massive effect when it comes to dialing in a solid low end in a production. Let's check out the audio sample and dive into these 3 simple mixing techniques. So as you can hear, the audio sample that I just played back had a thick and powerful low end, but it was very in control and very clear. It's going to sound really punchy on smaller speakers, and even on a bigger system with a sub, it won't get overly low-endy. It's right in that sweet spot, and I credit it to the 3 simple techniques that I utilized in this production, and to be honest with you, I use these in most of my productions. And mixing technique number 1 is to only allow your kick drum and bass guitar to live in the low end. And when I say the low end, I mean the deep low end, like all frequencies below 80 or 100 hertz. So in this mix, again, there's a lot of power happening in the low frequency department and the subs, but it's only coming from 2 instruments, my kick drum and my bass guitar, and then next would be my rhythm guitars. So if we look at the EQ on my rhythm guitars, I'm rolling off all frequencies below 80 hertz. And then if we look at the EQ on my bass guitar, I'm rolling off all frequencies below 55 or 60 hertz. And then below that sits my kick drum. There are no cymbals down there, lead guitars, vocals, keyboards, room mics, nothing. The thing is, a lot of these other instruments like cymbals, snare drums, vocals, lead guitars will contain low frequency information that doesn't serve the source sound. So you could just get rid of those low frequencies and you won't miss them, and they won't conflict with the instruments that belong down in the low end. People send me mixes all of the time. When I hear a cymbal crash come in, I can actually feel the low frequencies from the cymbal crash, and you better believe that those low frequencies are conflicting with the bass guitar and the kick drum, and it's unnecessary. So super simple, you don't need any special plugins for this. Just roll off all frequencies below 100 hertz on pretty much every single instrument, and make sure only really your bass guitar and kick drum are living in the deep subs. And tip number 2 is to use a brick wall limiter on your bass guitar to catch any stray peaks. In most mixes, most of the consistent low end is coming from the bass guitar. And if your bass guitar is not consistent enough, your low end is going to be all over the place. So the way I approach it is very straightforward. I compress my bass guitar, and then again, I use a brick wall limiter, which is a limiter that has a ratio of infinity to 1, just to make sure that nothing exceeds the threshold in which I set it at. So right here is the brick wall limiter that I have on my bass guitar. I'm going to play the audio sample back, and I'm going to actually intermittently bypass the plugin and pay very close attention to the low end. If you were paying close attention, you probably noticed that the low end was way more consistent and way more controlled when I had the limiter engaged. And the limiter isn't doing a whole lot. It's just making sure that no signal exceeds the threshold in which I have it set at. And because bass guitar makes up the majority of the low frequency information in your mix, by default, your low end will be way more in control and way more consistent sounding, which will give the effect of being clearer. Now let's move on to number 3, and it's something that I notice is happening a lot when people send me their mixes. People will say, I can't hear my bass guitar in my mix, but then when I turn it up, my mix gets really muddy when I listen to my mix on bigger systems like my car stereo. So you may have had this experience where you're mixing your track and you're saying, man, I really can't hear the bass guitar. You turn it up and it's sounding good on your studio monitors, sounding good in headphones, might even sound great on your phone, but the second you play it back on a bigger system, your bass is just way too loud. And the reason for this is simple. Remember, again, the bass guitar is making up the majority of the low frequency content in your mix. And if it's out of balance and out of whack, the low end of your entire mix is going to be out of balance and out of whack. So the question is this: how do you get your bass guitar clearer and nice and heard in your mix without throwing off the low end balance of your mix? And that leads us to tip number 3, which is to blend in some distortion or saturation subtly with your bass guitar. And the truth is, a little goes a long way with this. So right here is my bass mix, and I have 2 bass tracks, my main bass tone, which I just played before, and then a secondary bass track, which is the same DI, just duplicated, but I'm filtering out all frequencies below 800 Hertz and all frequencies above 4K, and adding a little bit of distortion with an amp sim. Now, if you hear this track on its own, it doesn't sound that great. Let's check it out. So that's my distortion track. Let's now hear the bass track. Now, if I played a whole mix back without the distortion track, pay close attention and see if you could really make out what the bass guitar is doing. So the mix still has that low end punch, but you really can't hear the bass guitar. Now I'm going to reintroduce the bass mid-range, and I might even intermittently bypass it while I'm playing it back and just listen to how much clearer it makes the bass, especially if you're listening on smaller speakers that are not reproducing low frequencies. Let's check it out. So as you can hear, that makes a pretty big difference. It takes the bass from being completely unheard to being present in the mix, and I am not manipulating the low end. So keep this in mind. Instead of pumping up your bass too loud and throwing off the low end balance and having your mix sound muddy on bigger systems, try blending in some mid-range saturation with your bass tone and have your bass cut through the mix, again, without having to change the low end of what you already have. So I'm curious to know, have you ever heard of any of these 3 techniques? Have you used them in your own productions? Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinion. Now, when it comes to achieving professional sounding mixes in your home studio, so much of your final results comes down to how well you understand basic EQ and compression. And because of this, I'm offering you direct access right now for absolutely free to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. The heavy mix formula is comprised of 3 primary components: an EQ and compression mixing PDF guide that contains all of my starting points for both EQ and compression for all of the main instruments within a heavy production. Each section of the PDF guide contains a clickable link to a private mixing tutorial where I dive deep on that particular instrument, and each tutorial comes with a multi-track download of the exact same files that I'm mixing, so you can download the files and mix along with me and learn the techniques and utilize them within your own workflow. Again, the heavy mix formula is absolutely free right now, and you can have direct access by clicking the link below in this video's description. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of our weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. Until next time, happy mixing.